From cars exploding into fireballs to barrel rolling at 180 miles per hour, there's been no shortage of death-defying moments in Formula One. So, let's take a look at some of the insane moments when F1 drivers survived the impossible and cheated death. Niki Lauda is up there as one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time, but he's perhaps best remembered for his horrifying crash in 1976 that left the whole world in shock. It was a damp Sunday afternoon in the forests of West Germany when Lauda would take his starting position on one of the most infamous F1 tracks of all time, the Nürburgring. The track had garnered a notorious reputation for being deadly and was dubbed the Green Hell for claiming the lives of 5 F1 drivers. So, it was understandable that Lauda had some safety concerns. In fact, he had actually attempted to convince his fellow drivers to boycott the race just the previous week, only for his efforts to be unsuccessful. But I'm not sure even Nikki could have imagined what a horrifying turn this race would take. It was the second lap, and after a poor start and early pit stop, Lauda was giving it his all to make up for some lost time. But as he approached the Bergwerk corner, disaster would strike. Watching back the old footage, it's truly harrowing how everything went catastrophically wrong in just a split second. After colliding with the barrier, Lauda's car was almost sheared in half, before it was then engulfed in a blazing fireball. He now had mere seconds to live. As if things couldn't have gotten any worse, his car had come to rest in the middle of the track, directly in the path of the oncoming cars. The first car managed to avoid him, but another driver crashed into the burning death trap, spinning Lauda across the track once again. Onlookers were helpless, and with only a single ill-equipped marshal present, it looked as though the Green Hell would claim its next victim. Some of Lauda's fellow drivers stopped on track, realizing the grave nature of the situation, and jumped into action, attempting to save their comrade's life. But it was one man, Arturo Mazzario, who pulled off a miracle, diving into the burning wreckage to unbuckle Lauda's seatbelt before dragging him to safety. He was rushed to the hospital, but his chances looked bleak. Having spent 55 seconds in the raging fire, his injuries were severe, having sustained life-threatening burns to his head and face, as well as inhaling toxic fumes that damaged his lungs. A priest was even called to perform the last rites on him, and by all accounts, he should have died. But Lauda fought back, cheating an almost certain death, and when he finally awoke, legend has it that he said, "Tell the priest to f*** off, I'm still alive." If you've ever witnessed the freak incident that occurred at the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix, then brace yourself, because it truly is haunting to watch. It was a seemingly regular qualifying session, as the camera panned to Felipe Massa, who was following the car of Rubens Barrichello just ahead. But in just a split second, everything went horrifyingly wrong. For some seemingly inexplicable reason, Massa suddenly became unresponsive, failing to brake or turn his car, plowing head-on into the tire wall. Spectators were filled with as much horror as confusion, because this crash came completely out of nowhere. Medical assistance arrived almost immediately, but alarmingly, things were much worse than they could have possibly imagined, as Massa had somehow sustained life-threatening injuries to his head. The onboard footage reveals the truth. Slowing down the video, you can see an object strike Massa in the head at tremendous speeds. That object was, in fact, a spring that had fallen off the car of Rubens Barrichello just ahead. The spring struck Massa's helmet at over 155 miles per hour, instantly knocking him unconscious, fracturing his skull. Somehow, the spring also penetrated Massa's visor, striking him just above the left eye, perilously close to his cornea. Had the spring hit Massa just a few inches lower, he almost certainly would have been killed. Romain Grosjean's incident at the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix is arguably the most jaw-dropping crash in recent history. I don't think anyone could have possibly seen it coming. It was only the first lap, and everything seemed to be running smoothly. But as the camera followed the race leaders, a car suddenly veered off track in the background and exploded into a blazing fireball. In a gut-wrenching moment, Grosjean had made contact with Daniel Kvyat's car, sending him hurtling into the crash barriers. The impact was nothing short of devastating and occurred at the frightening speed of 119 miles per hour. This was so fast that his car penetrated the metal crash barriers, lodging him in a seemingly inescapable fiery prison. Immediately, everyone feared the worst. I mean, this crash truly looked unsurvivable. Grosjean was now pinned in his cockpit, unable to escape. He even described feeling at peace with dying in that moment. That was until he thought of his wife and children. He mustered any remaining strength he possibly had left, and like a phoenix from the ashes, he rose from the inferno in some of the most dramatic footage ever captured on camera. Not only had Grosjean survived a devastating crash, but he'd managed to withstand 28 seconds in the raging fire. Every time I watch him escape an almost certain death, it gives me chills. And to top it all off, Grosjean walked to the ambulance himself. I mean, he didn't just cheat death, he gave death the middle finger. The Australian Grand Prix is one of the most iconic races on the F1 calendar, but in 2016, it almost became the site of Fernando Alonso's untimely demise. It was lap 17, and Alonso was following the Haas of Esteban Gutierrez. Alonso was gaining on the Haas at a blistering rate, and on the run down to turn 3, he was within striking distance. But as he moved to overtake, he misjudged when Gutierrez would brake, and his front right wheel clipped the rear left of the Haas. In an instant, Alonso's suspension collapsed, sending him crashing into the wall at a jaw-dropping 190 miles per hour. He was then sent skidding down the track before his car then dug into the gravel, sending him flying through the air. He only came to a stop when his car smashed into the barriers at the end of the gravel trap. You only need to see the wreckage of his car to realize how dire the situation was. I mean, the car was basically just a pile of metal scrap. But somehow, Alonso dragged himself from the wreckage, shook up but completely unscathed. Fernando well and truly danced with death that day. The next crash at the 2007 Grand Prix is a stark reminder of how dangerous racing at death-defying speeds can truly be. It was lap 26, and Robert Kubica was approaching the iconic hairpin in his BMW, but devastatingly, he clipped the back of Jarno Trulli's car just ahead, which sent him onto the grass. Now, normally this wouldn't be too much of an issue, but unfortunately for Kubica, there was a bump in the grass which lifted the nose of his car into the air. This left him with literally no control over his car whatsoever. Unable to brake or steer, he was now merely a passenger as his car hurtled into the barriers at 186 miles per hour, seemingly disintegrating on impact. He was then flung across the track, barrel rolling mid-air, until he finally came to a stop when he collided with the opposite wall. It seems almost absurd, but you can literally see Kubica's feet hanging out of the nose of the car. The crash was so violent that he experienced a peak G-force of 75 G. Just to put that into context, that's the same as decelerating from 100 to 0 km per hour in a mind-bending 0.038 seconds. If this crash had happened just a decade prior, it's likely that he would have been killed on impact. But thankfully, in the 10 years leading up to the incident, the FIA had introduced new safety regulations that undoubtedly saved Kubica's life.